Brian, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to chat with you. All right, Brian. So, I was going through your background. You're exceptionally impressive. I was trying to kind of break it down in something succinct. I can't. So, what we're going to do is I'm just going to kind of run through really quick your background and tell me how I did. All right. So, you start off in TradFi, doing debt market stuff, commodity trading, things like that. You started the in 2013, which is crazy, the Blockchain Berlin meetup in 2013, which is nuts. You also in 2013 you started your podcast, the Epicenter podcast, which I would probably assume is the oldest running podcast around blockchains, crypto, Web3. 2017, you were working with Tendermint slash Cosmos, and I want to learn more about that. 2018, you launched Chorus One, which I would say is probably one of the most well-known premier validators in the kind of the whole crypto ecosystem. And also, you're involved with Urbit. All right, so how did I do? How is that?
It was great. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right,
Thank
amazing.
you.
All right. So take me all the way back to 2013 blockchain Berlin, because like back then I understand debt markets and commodities, so you had some kind of relevant expertise there. But how did you even get involved in crypto back then? And was it just Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I would say as a teenager I was very interested in econ, and I was interested in libertarian ideas as well. So I think I had some kind of maybe instinctive aversion to authority, government, rules and restrictions. And then I studied econ as an undergrad, and afterwards I was kind of trying to figure out what to do, and was a little bit on a search and didn't really find anything that really inspired me. And then at one point I was like, hey, this starting companies seems like that would be a great thing, because I don't really want to work for anyone else, so I'd like to be able to do that. So then I had done like some attempts at that, but one of the big problems was also there was nothing I was really interested in. There was nothing like, oh, this is the thing I want to do. And so I would say I was kind of in this search of trying to find something. And that's when I learned about Bitcoin. So that was probably in maybe like May 2013 to May June 2013. I was finishing up a master thesis at the time too, but then I was like, okay, this is I basically lost most interest in anything else, and I was like, okay, I want to go all in on that, because to me it combined like a bunch of things. It combined a bit this revolutionary idea of creating a new system that's like more free, where people have more autonomy, that can be like anonymous. And then it also had this kind of technology startup. It just felt like a massive opportunity. And it was an interesting time too. I remember I bought my first Bitcoin. It was $72. But it was at early 13. There had been this kind of bubble, and it kind of crashed down, and it was sort of at this low after that crash. But it started going up, and it started going up like a lot. And back then the sort of center of crypto was the Bitcoin Reddit, our Bitcoin. It would be like someone would post like, oh look, there's a newspaper, it's mentioned Bitcoin, and they would like post it, and everyone would be very excited if there's like any kind of mention anywhere of it. But because it started going up, and it was like up, yeah, there's a crazy bull run. Then it went from basically that 70 to like $1,300, I think, within like 6 months.
I think it was because I bought it $200 in
Yeah.
September or something like that. And then
Right.
in
Yeah.
November, December, it went up to 1,000, like 100, 200, something like 1,300, something like that. I was like, I'm a genius. I'm amazing. I'm like Warren Buffett. Like I'm so smart. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was a crazy period. But
It was a
it's
crazy
even more
period.
incredible that
Yeah.
you were in that first wave of 2013.
Well, I mean, just before you, right? Like very sure. But like, I think the interesting thing, which somehow I ended up completely miscalculating, because to me it seemed like, well, everyone is now understanding this thing is the future, and if they understand it, obviously they want to buy some Bitcoin, and it's just going to keep going up. And as it goes up, more people understand it, and so the whole thing of like, oh, but then there's going to be crash, and there's going to be bear market, and it's going to be a cycle, and it's going to come back. That was really not on my radar at all. I was really expecting it would just be like straight up. So that was it was interesting then to see kind of that all of a sudden then you'd have these long phases of markets down, loss of faith, people leaving, funding drying up. But yeah, so basically that was then, and then I was like, oh, I wanted to do something. I was like, what are easy things to get started? So there was no Bitcoin meetup. There was no Bitcoin meetup in Berlin where you give like talks and there was content and stuff. So I started one, and we did meetups every 2 weeks. And I would give a lot of talks and like, oh, this is white paper I read, like let me talk about it. And other people gave a lot of talks. So it was a pretty vibrant group. And then I started Epicenter at the end of, actually exactly 11 years ago now. It was in December
No
2022.
way. Wow. So the early meetups in Berlin, was that like was Berlin a hotbed for, because I know Berlin's kind of like a city that's startup heavy and also they think alternatively. Was it, back in 2013, was Berlin a hot scene for crypto in general, or how was it
It
like?
was. It was a bit, yeah. I mean, that when I started the meetup group, there was already like, first meetup, there's like 40 people showed
Oh,
up.
wow. In 2013. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So there was definitely that kind of like latent crypto community there. Berlin was an interesting place in another way. So there's a bar in Berlin, or there was a bar, it's closed now, but it was called Room 77. And that guy was like a hardcore like anarchist, and he just found out Bitcoin. He was like, this is amazing. So he started accepting Bitcoin for payments in 2011.
Cool. Wow.
So this was
2011.
the this yeah this was the first place in the world where you
Wow.
could like go to a place and buy your burger and beer and stuff with Bitcoin. And then the first mobile wallet, which was a Bitcoin for Android wallet, was built by some guy in Berlin who was, would go to this bar and buy like beers and beer. But back then you had no mobile wallet, so people would take a laptop and then they would type the address like manually and like hope they don't mess it
No
up and then
way.
send some
That's
Bitcoin over. So he
crazy.
was like, this is dumb, right? So he built then the mobile wallet,
Wow.
basically to pay in his bar, right? It wasn't really meant as a business.
Does he own like half of Berlin now, or what's do you know about him?
Developer of the app, I know him. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I don't think so. He was not like a super, he's just a kind of app developer.
What about the bar owner?
I don't know. I'm sure he has a decent amount of Bitcoin for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, he was also a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. So later, he liked to come to the meetup at first, but then we were always doing talks about like other stuff,
Yeah.
and then he was like, "This is going in the wrong direction. I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop coming here."
That's funny. So what was the thought process around starting the podcast? Because again, 2013 is extremely early for this type of activity, especially back then. For me, at least, it was just Bitcoin. Like that. That's all what I was really interested in and thinking about. But for you, I think you guys started off with, you mentioned you were talking about different technologies and different chains, et cetera.
Yeah.
So how'd that start?
Yeah, I mean, I feel even when I got interested in the middle of 2013, there was already a lot of other ideas around, right? I mean, there were okay, there was like Litecoin, which is kind of dumb, but there were people trying to do some kind of smart contract type stuff on top of Bitcoin. There was colored coins, there was a project called Counterparty, there was one called Mastercoin. Actually, interestingly, today some of these ideas are kind of coming back in this whole like Bitcoin L2, Bitcoin DeFi world. But so this was already there, and I was interested in these things. And then, of course, the Ethereum white paper came out in December 2023, and that was also like, okay, this is very interesting. And then Ethereum started having a big presence in Berlin as well. But with regards to the podcast, actually, when I got into crypto first, I was writing this master's thesis, and I was like trying to finish that. But the way I basically got exposure to it, at the time, there was one podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. I would just listen to this podcast, and they did like 2 episodes a week, I think, and they started maybe 2 months before, so there was a bit of a backlog. So I would just listen to this podcast all the time, and I was a fan of the podcast format. I thought it was a great, it has a lot of great benefits, right? You can go and speak with interesting people, and it's pretty easy to get people to join your podcast because people like to talk about their ideas and their stuff, and then you can learn a lot, you can build a lot of connections, and of course you can just get started, right? You don't need to raise money, you don't need to get permission from anyone. So I think it was I mean, I still think it's a fantastic way to sort of get into a field and uh, build a brand. And I'm actually curious, what's the thinking behind your podcast?
You nailed it. I mean, it's really around. First of all, obviously obsessed with crypto, so that's great. If I can talk about what I'm obsessed with all day with other people that are obsessed, like wonderful. But then, as you mentioned, you can. It's funny. I can go to someone who maybe could be a billionaire, or someone who is kind of big time or whatever, and say, "Hey, do you want to have a phone call?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "Do you want to have a podcast?" And they're like, "Yeah." Like, I'll do that, right?
For
So it's
sure.
it's a
Yeah,
great way
yeah.
to meet people, connect, and really just learn. Because, like, for example, today I'm going to be learning about course one validators, Urbit, etc. All these things that I don't really understand at all. And so being able to talk to you about them is going to be is just a cheat code for accelerated learning. Because if we were going to have a phone call, first of all, convincing you of that would be more difficult. Second of all, for me to just ping you with all these questions, it would be like, dude, like, why, we can't, can we just have a conversation? Like, relax. But in a podcast format, it's like, no, it's totally fine. It's like meant for that,
Yeah.
right? So it's a cheat code. I always call it like a cheat code to life, really. So yeah, no, I'm very, very pro podcast. So back then, who were you having on as guests? I mean, yeah, so you are correct. There was actually a vibrant ecosystem that wasn't just Bitcoin, but I mean, what was it? Were you having like the counterparty guys and like the colored coin people, and like, were you having these folks on that were building different interesting things within the ecosystem?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first few episodes we didn't have guests, but then we started having guests like super quickly, and yeah, yeah, we started having a lot of yeah, we started having. I mean, also Ethereum came, basically started coming up then. Um, and so that was basically just around when we started podcast. But yeah, we had all kinds of people on. I think we were always very broad. We'd have people on who are like building startups. We'd have people on who who talked about regulation or developers or talked about Bitcoin development or new papers. So we were always very kind of all over the place. But just sort of followed whatever our curiosity had.
That's awesome. So you eventually ended up working with the Tendermint folks, and Tendermint eventually, I guess, changed their name to Cosmos. Or you can tell me more, but I know like Tendermint became Cosmos, kind of. Cosmos is a huge deal. So I guess tell me, how did you come into that working with those folks?
Yeah, I mean, again, the idea of proof of stake was already there when I got. I mean, I think I learned about proof of stake in like the first few months when I was in crypto, right? Where the idea was already there. There were some chains that had started in 2012 that were trying to do some sort of proof of stake like thing. I think there's one called NXT, one was called Purecoin. I mean, these chains maybe didn't really succeed, but
Wasn't
and
Masternodes also was that proof of stake or no?
some sort of hybrid
Okay.
thing. Yeah, and then and Ethereum, of course, even in the Ethereum white paper, end of 2013, they said, okay, we're gonna launch with proof of work, but we're gonna switch to proof of stake soon. The soon ended up taking like 8 years or something, so it took them like way longer than they thought. But the idea was already there. So I was, and it just made a lot of sense to me, proof of stake. But and then I in the Tendermint white paper was written in 2014, I
Oh
think,
wow.
as well. So it's basically saying, hey, we have this classical consensus algorithm like PBFT from decades ago, and those are being used today, to synchronize databases or like in many ways. But let's basically take that and we adapt it for the blockchain context, right? So we have like a validator set, and then people can rotate validators. So that white paper was written by Jake Won in 2014. I joined a company called Ares Industries. They later renamed to Monax in 2014. No, sorry, 2015. That company was trying to build basically enterprise blockchain applications.
Wow.
So they said there was two lawyers were the founders. So they said, hey, problem is with this Ethereum thing, institutions cannot use it, companies cannot use it because the regulatory thing is like too messy. So we need to, allow some kind of restrictions on the chain, and then we can do this permission chains and consortium chains and issue, financial assets on chain and stuff like that. And I was pretty close with the whole Ethereum team and ecosystem. To me, it just seemed that it was really far from working. Because, for one, the scalability was not there. The usability was terrible. So it was like, okay, if this is like the time it's going to take to have like, applications that a normal person would use, is like many years. Of course, what I didn't realize at the time was that we would have ICOs, and the ICOs, I think, changed everything. But so I was thinking like, well, probably a better way to get crypto adoption is that you first focus on like enterprise. So then I went there, and that company was basically forking Ethereum and said, okay, we do these enterprise Ethereum applications. But then, of course, proof of work didn't make any sense. So they were like, okay, we have to get rid of this proof of work thing, replace it with something. And that company then found Tendermint. And they were like, oh, we're going to use this Tendermint thing. So we were basically building on top of Tendermint. Then one of the first engineers at that company, this guy, Ethan Buckman, he then left and joined Jay to become like the co-founder of Tendermint. And then I left the company too, and then I joined. I became COO there. So that was when we were maybe like 4 or 5 people. The start of 2017, and the Cosmos white paper had been written a few months before. So there was kind of the Cosmos vision was there.
Sorry to cut you off. So I guess I always get a little confused. Tendermint was the precursor to Cosmos, the actual blockchain, or what?
Well,
what is the
Tendermint is actually just a consensus algorithm.
okay? But
So
wasn't there a
it's
Tendermint Foundation?
No, that's the Interchain Foundation.
Interchange. Okay.
Yeah,
Interchain.
So Tendermint is basically the consensus algorithm. Tendermint is used by many today also by many chains that are like Polygon, for example, or even like sort of chains that are not necessarily like Cosmos chains. They use Tendermint. But then the Cosmos vision was basically we are going to have a lot of different blockchains, and the blockchains can have different functions, different use cases, different communities. They can be sort of customized for their particular need. And each of these blockchains is responsible for their own security. They have its own staking token. And then we're going to have a protocol for how they all interoperate with each other. So it's basically this vision of having this ecosystem of many different sovereign chains, interoperable chains. So that was the Cosmos vision. And then in terms of the tech stack, the core parts of the tech stack was really like Tendermint on the consensus. And there was the Cosmos SDK, was this kind of framework. You can think of a bit like a Ruby on Rails for blockchains type thing, where you could just take that framework and build your own blockchain easily. So the Cosmos SDK would then have different modules you could plug in, and would have Tendermint as a consensus. And then we use this system called IBC for communicating with each other. So that was kind of the what that was. And then we did basically this token sale in the middle. Well, that was the 2017 as well, right? Which was one of the. It was on the early phase of the kind of ICO bubble we raised. It was actually very unclear, like how well is this going to work. We did like zero marketing almost. It was a very much like tech-led project, and they were like very different from the teams today. The teams today are very much like, oh, we're gonna have like go to market and dev rails, and there was just like we're just gonna code. But there was enough attention on the project, and then we did this token sale, and it ended up going super well. We basically had set a cap of 17 million, although it was not published. It was like a weird mechanism. We were basically like, there is a cap. We're not going to tell you what, but at some point it's over. That was kind of and then
17 million what?
In Bitcoin and ETH.
Okay. $17 million worth
dollars.
Of?
Yeah, dollars worth of.
Because there's like Gollum, who I don't know what their cap was, but it was probably 17 million Ethereum. Like it was like they just raised so much. But I'm joking, but it was crazy.
Gollum, I mean, I think it was less. Gollum raised less.
Oh no way!
But of course, they raised a bit earlier. Gollum was maybe like 6 months earlier.
Okay.
And I mean, I think the thing is just, it was for both these projects. I think when we raised, Ethereum was at $40. Right?
Yeah.
So of course, if you hold on, then the 17 million become like 2 billion, right? That's
True.
So yeah, and then I was working there.
What wasn't the vision of Cosmos Internet of Blockchains, where it's like we're going to create, almost an interoperability layer? Was that kind of the?
Yeah, the interoperability layer is basically the IBC. IBC is kind of like a protocol where you can have two different blockchains, and then you have a light client for each blockchain in the other blockchain. So now if this blockchain gets like basically a packet from the other blockchain, you can verify, oh, this is really correct transaction in this chain. And so then you can basically have interoperable
Like an
chains.
OG bridge, the bridging mechanism.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, I mean, IBC is the is definitely one of the earliest interoperability protocols.
Oh yeah. I think it's
Um,
then Polkadot probably.
yeah, I mean, it was before
Yeah.
Polkadot, but yeah, if you look at, for example, there's a website, Map of Zones. I'll post a link here if you want to. But that has today IBC has like very substantial volume, right? You see,
Oh, very cool. Mapofzones.com.
yeah. So there's what is the I mean,
It's
certainly in the
very cool.
billions per every month on IBC transfers.
You were there and building it out, and then at what point were you like, okay, I want to go start my own thing? Because I mean, Cosmos was successful back then. I would still argue is very successful as a blockchain project. Why would you leave that, right? Because it was doing well.
Well, so the basically the organization was a big mess. So it was very smart people, and the vision was great. I think the vision was extremely prescient, and I think to a very large extent it has realized. But organizationally, it was a huge mess.
What was it organized like as like a DAO, or what was kind of the
No, it was a company. It was a
okay?
U.S. company. I mean, there is a Swiss foundation, the
Mm,
Interchain Foundation, that kind of did the fundraiser and
mm,
received the money. But then all of the development, all of the people were in an American company, and yeah, that company just, I mean, it ended up kind of falling apart, and
interesting.
people then started many different. I mean, the amount of projects that kind of were later started by people there is very large. Like a
Yeah.
lot of great projects came out of it. But as an organization, it was very. I mean, it was also as long as there was the token, the fundraiser, I could like help with that. I could help with like setting up some entities. I could help a bit with the hiring. But then at one point, it became much more of a okay. The developers just have to get this like ready for mainnet, and there wasn't. It didn't feel like there was as much for me to do, and it was a difficult environment to work in. And I had also wanted to start something with my co-founder at Course One, and he was also my co-host for a few years
Mm.
at Epicenter, Meher Roy, and he was sort of free at the time, and I was like, well, let's do something together. And it was clear that the proof of stake was going to be a big thing. We're going to have lots of proof of stake networks launching.
So
So
I have a question about that, and sorry to cut you off again, but proof
yeah,
of stake, like I felt like proof of stake, there has always been, I feel like a fair amount of questions around proof of stake, especially back then, right? Like people are like, well, is this going to work? Like proof of work is so much better. Proof of stake is not going to actually make anything secure, et cetera, et cetera. How did you know? Like, how did you know, and why were you so confident enough to start a company focused on that?
I mean, it seemed very. It seemed. I mean, first of all, I mean, my background, also academic background, is in where I focused most was in game theory. To me, it just seemed very clear that from a game theoretic perspective, like proof of stake is totally going to be secure, and I mean that's proven out, right? Like in all of these years, you've basically, we've had some proof of work networks fail, right, through 51% attacks. Of course, not Bitcoin and stuff, but small ones. But proof of stake, even the small ones, like none of them have ever like suffered any of these attacks. So I think from a game theoretic perspective, it was very clear to me. I was just very convinced that this makes a lot of sense. It has a lot of benefits, right? You can have much faster block times. You can have better interoperability because you can basically have real finality on a block, like you can rely on it. Not with Bitcoin, where you can have, you can get rollbacks and you have to wait for like 6 blocks or something. Or proof of stake networks, like Tendermint, every block is final. So you can have much better interoperability. You can have much faster block time. You can have much more scalability. So there was just many advantages to proof of stake. At the same time, you had many projects at the time already who were planning to launch proof of stake networks. So there was Cosmos, there was Tezos, Polkadot was working on their thing. There was Ethereum was planning to switch to it later. There was a Definity. So there was there was already like a significant number of projects all working on that, and it felt very much like, okay, of course there's Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is huge, and Bitcoin's not going to switch to proof of stake. But when it came to like new networks that were being launched, mostly they were doing some type of proof of stake. So it really felt very clear that this was going to be a big industry.
And your thought process was what? Okay, I know proof of stake is going to be very large. Therefore, we should start a validator business because I feel like that wasn't really a thing back then.
No, that definitely wasn't a thing. I mean, it was just sort of the most obvious thing to do, right? Because I was like, okay, wanted to keep working on Cosmos to some extent, so then the chain will be launched, and actually, I was also concerned at the time because we would write this white paper, and we were like, oh, there would be all these validators, and people would stake their token with these validators, and these validators would like run these servers that create, verify the transactions, create the blocks, and secure the chains. But that was just, it's just a word, validators. There was nobody that didn't exist, right? So there was definitely also a question of, when we now release the software, are there going to be validators, and who are they, and where do they come from? So it did also feel like, hey, there's a need for someone to do this. Of course, it ended up not being like that. It ended up, even from the first Cosmos testnet, there was lots of people who were like, "Oh, we're gonna run a validator," right? Lots of like hobbyists and including companies. I think today, if you look at the largest proof of stake companies, actually, quite a few of them all started with the first Cosmos. Probably of the biggest 10 proof of stake companies, like 5 of them were started in the
Wow.
Cosmos testnets.
So tell me about Chorus One. Like, what is Chorus One? And I guess the why of why I decided to start it is obvious now because you're like, oh, there's a need and it could be a big business. But tell me about Chorus One.
Yeah, I would say the underlying big assumption and vision is that in the future we expect that most of the economic activity will be somehow happening on decentralized networks, and that proof of stake is going to be a key part for how these networks are secured, and probably like the most important part for running this infrastructure. Of course, one, we really want to operate to be one of the main operators of infrastructure for decentralized networks, kind of facilitate all of these transactions, all of these use cases. In the end, I think bring us to a world where you have a lot more innovation, you have a lot more freedom for people. And so that was kind of the vision. And, we will just want to basically do this at the very high level in a very professional way. And so today, so the first networks, we were launched around then, 2019. And today, I think we support around 70 different blockchains. So it's growing a lot.
That's
And,
amazing.
we keep onboarding new blockchains, several times a month. And we work, of course, it's also changed a lot in terms of who stakes, right? In the beginning, it was mostly, individuals, although, there started to be some VC funds, right, that were participating in these ICOs. Today, I mean, we have a lot of retail investors who's taking off, but then a lot of the, big VC funds. We work with many custodians, like BitGo, Anchorage, etc. We work with, different exchanges. We work with wallets. So like lots of different parties, right? Because also, of course, proof of stake now has become just, I think if people get into crypto, right, the first thing they do is they buy some crypto. And then often the second thing they will do is, oh, now let me stake it and I can earn some yield on it. So it's one of the most frequent things that people do. It's simple. It's a sort of no brainer, right? If you're holding ETH, if you hold Solana, if you hold any stakeable asset, and if you're not kind of a frequent trader going in and out, then you may as well stake it.
Totally.
And so I think it's become something that really is a key part, right? A key functionality of anyone who provides any kind of like asset, custody service, or has any kind of users that hold crypto. You want to offer staking.
All right. So in terms of the validators themselves, each validator for each protocol, each network is probably pretty different from each other, and the requirements, I assume, are somewhat different. So I guess like how are you ingesting all this information and figuring out the requirements for, Cosmos versus Ethereum versus Solana versus Scale, who knows, like all these different networks, right? I just feel like it's so much. Each one of these is its own universe. So how are you ingesting and digesting all this information to effectively run this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, for example, that is also one of the benefits of Cosmos, is that from a validator perspective, these chains are pretty similar. So, for example, onboarding another Cosmos chain, for the most part, pretty easy. Although, of course, sometimes people change stuff and it's not so easy. But for us, I mean, first of all, we have a significant, larger team. For us is a research team. So the research team spends a lot of time looking at new protocols, figuring out what's going to start. What's going live soon. Does it make sense? And looks at it from a variety of different perspectives, and then we have I don't know, like 35, 40 people engineering team, right, who then will launch these networks and operate them, and some of them are pretty easy to onboard and some of them are a ton of work. The bandwidth is like very large, and also sometimes it's really just you're just running the sort of software that's being provided by the network. And in other cases, we build more complex products that allow staking. So to give an example, we've been doing a lot of work on ton, because some of the networks, actually, this normal staking flow is not very user friendly. Ethereum is a great example, right? In Ethereum, it's like, oh, you just want to stake 2 ETH. Well, I mean, originally, no, you have to have 32, but there, people have built, like, we have a very easy to use ETH product now. You can stake any amount of ETH and it's just one transaction and no complexity. But that has a big on-chain component, right? It's a whole smart contract system around it. So that's happened on Ethereum. And so, for example, doing a similar thing on Ton, because Ton also has the problem that kind of normal staking logic is very unfriendly. So in some cases, then it really becomes like a much more involved engineering effort, includes writing smart contracts, but mostly it's about just running the infrastructure.
So your research team, how are they? What are the factors you're looking at to identify whether or not you should move forward with the efforts that's required to start validating for a certain chain? Because I'm sure you're pinged 100 times by different projects. So how do you guys decide? Okay, we've done our homework based on these factors. We're going to go with this chain.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's different ones, right? One is just, is the sort of use case sensible? Does the team seem decent? The code quality, how far along is it? Is the code quality okay? Things like that. Then looking at things like the tokenomics. So is it something where we can generate revenues? Does it kind of make sense? Then of market cap, or potential market cap to you can look at, like, investors. Of course, a factor for us is also, are we going to be able to get a significant amount of stake on this network? If you have like existing customers, right, who have significant positions, that can be a factor too. And then the complexity of integration and our bandwidth is a factor. So if it's a very complex thing to run, then it's maybe not worth it. But if it's high potential and it's manageable to run, then we'll try to do it. And we try to. So of the larger staking companies, we're the ones who support the largest number of networks. So we definitely focus a lot on just being very early and supporting a lot of different networks and being there at network launch.
Very cool. So how do you differentiate? Speaking of the other validator companies, how do you differentiate in a world where the actual architecture of these validators, it's meant to be like open to whoever, right? I know, like, the actual decision making process of who gets to become a validator is initially pretty controlled, because it has to be, like, you can't let just anyone run this stuff, because if the infrastructure doesn't work, then the network won't work. But once these things are up and running, how are you competing, or how do you differentiate between other validator companies and versus Course One?
There's different dimensions. I mean, actually, the thing about network coverage is one, right? So we try to be early and we try to support more networks. So of course, if you're there and the competition is not there, then that's a great advantage. One area where we have focused a lot on is MEV and kind of reward optimization. So in some cases, there's not much to do, right? You just run the software, and everyone roughly produces the same amount of staking rewards, proportional to their stake and stuff. So it's kind of, it doesn't vary that much. But in other cases, there are things you can do to basically vary the rewards. So we've focused a lot on Ethereum there, where we basically run a modified Ethereum client. So we have our own fork, and that optimizes the MEV rewards a bit. So there we are able to generate, a bit higher rewards. I think it's on the MEV part is like 15% right now. So I
15%,
think
15%.
so 15% more on the MEV
Oh,
part.
okay.
Now the MEV part is not the full block rewards, right? So then I think it ends up being maybe like 5% more staking rewards.
No way, on ETH.
I mean, not like, so if it's like, 3.3%, then you multiply it by,
Okay,
1,
okay, cool.
1.05,
It's
right?
just
Not
it's
like,
still very, very substantial over time.
yeah. And at the moment, we focus quite a lot on Solana, where I think there's also a lot of opportunities. So that's one thing. But then a lot of it is, I mean, we have a big institutional focus. So there are things like, security audits, ISO compliance. Integrations are very important, right? So being integrated with different custodians, because often, some fund they need to use, let's say, qualified custodian, and then if you don't have, if they don't allow you to stake with the validator, there's kind of not much you can do. So that is a big factor that's important. So we focus a lot on that, and in some cases, product can be a differentiator as well.
Very cool. And you also offer white label validators. So I guess, tell me about that, because the thought process initially is like, oh, they're kind of enabling competitors potentially to operate their own validators. It's not really really like that, because you guys are operating that infrastructure, and there's probably some sort of fee split or something like that. But I guess tell me the logic behind setting up these white label validators.
Yeah, so there's different reasons for white label validators. Sometimes you have some other company, and they care about brand, right? So they want their own name there, because in the end, a lot of people look at these block explorers. They look at like, oh, I don't know, Cosmos or whatever near, and then they look at this validator list, and then if they see a name there, so that can be a factor. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's the opposite, right? We also have then white label validators are totally anonymous, and they don't want to, they want to have as little information possible, and then also prefer white label validator for that. Sometimes you can also set different types of fee structures. So let's say now it's some kind of wallet, and they want to have people, stake to that. And then they can say, okay, we're going to have our white label validator, and we're going to charge some, because in the end, let's say we charge 5% on chain, but maybe they want to charge 8 or something different, then they can do that. So that's like some of the reasons. In some cases, like let's say, I mean, Ethereum works a little bit different, but in Ethereum, we have more this vault-based system, or basically a pool where you can stake with. But there, we also have the ability to have like private pools. So, we have some customers, they don't want to have any of their ETH sort of mixed up with other people for maybe legal reasons. And then it's like, oh, we want to have a private vault where, we can make sure that we're the only ones and nobody else is delegating there.
Very cool. All right, so you also have Course One Ventures, which I'm pretty sure is self-funded by just you guys. And also, I'm pretty sure that Course One itself is just self-funded by you guys as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically, when we started Course One, I mean, my co-founder and I had been in crypto for a while, so we had we had made some money, and we were like, okay, let's just put some of our own money in there and kind of get started, hire a team, and then maybe later we raise some VC funding. And then so we got started with that, and then I think the next year, 20 kind of 18, 19, we did make some attempts to raise some VC funding. Didn't really succeed in that, and then we were like, okay, let's just focus on focus more on revenues and focus more on just doing it without VC funding, which has worked out great
Yeah,
in the end.
that's probably great.
Yeah. I'm very. I mean, I think it's super nice not to have
Yeah.
a board to report to have really like sort of full autonomy about what we can do. And then actually, the very first time we made an investment from our balance sheet was in 4 years ago, pretty much exactly 4 years ago, which was Lido. So we
Ooh,
were one of the original, initially it was 5 validators that launched Lido. And so we were
wow.
one of those. And then we also a seed investor in Lido. So that is also one of our, it's also turned out to be an extremely good investment. But that was the first time we did an investment. And then we kind of kept making investments, and then over time we started making this much more systematic. Now we have a ventures team of like 3 people. We have made, I think, around 90 different investments now.
9-0.
Yeah, 90. Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing. And I assume all or mostly in proof of stake networks.
Yeah, so a lot of it is in proof of stake networks, right? A lot of it is in protocols that we're going to operate on. So proof of stake networks, there's interoperability protocols. We've made quite a few investments. We've made quite a few investments in liquid staking protocols. So, there was Lido, but then there was maybe like 5 others or something. There's is a pretty, but yeah, there tends to be some degree of strategic interest or some degree of to which we're going to work with these projects as well. MEV is another one where actually we've made quite a few investments around MEV, including like we invested in Ganaka, which is the biggest block builder on Ethereum. So
Very
they
cool.
run like Titan builder. But we've made a bunch of other MEV related investments as well.
That's awesome. What would you say is the kind of the hardest parts of running your own company?
Well, if I look at the history of the company, I think the biggest mistake we made was not being focused enough. So in the beginning, we were doing staking, right? We were running these validators, and at the same time, we had some concerns about, but is this differentiated enough? This business, there are no real network effects around it, and maybe we should try to think of something else that's like a bigger idea, right? And so we spent a significant amount of our energy in the first, like, let's say 3 years on exploring a bunch of other ideas. And then in the end, we'd come up with something. We're like, this is a really cool idea. But at the same time, we're like, if we going to execute on this, we cannot really, like, we just cannot do both in a
Mm,
reasonable way. We ended up killing this idea and then kind of keep doing staking. We come up with another idea. Probably did that like 2 or 3 times, and that ended up being, I think in retrospect, was a terrible mistake. And then at one point, I think maybe around 3 years ago, we were like, no, let's just focus on staking and let's try to do that well. And back then we had a much smaller team doing like a whole bunch of different stuff. We also did a whole bunch of grant work for foundations where they paid us to do some core development and stuff like that. So we basically said, okay, look, stop all that, just focus on staking, do that really well. And I think that was a crucial decision. I think if we hadn't done that, I think we would have just gotten like left in the dust by the
wow.
competition.
I mean, it's also crazy because you guys are. I mean, I would consider you probably number one, number two, number three, no, top three, and just the idea that if you guys, were just 3 years ago just doing this, it would be, it's so dominant, it would be crazy, right? Because like you guys are already top, so it's like how much better can you get, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, we're not the largest today, but I feel like if we had been really fully focused on this, like from the start, I think probably we would be. Yeah, so I
But you
think
guys are also
that's.
self-funded, and those big guys are not self-funded, so that's also something that's, if you raise X millions of dollars, it's kind of a big advantage versus a self-funded person.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of them are more or less self-funded. So I think, for example, P2P.org was like I mean, they did one round.
He was like a
Like I
big
think
Bitcoin. That's a big Bitcoin miner, right?
no, Stakefish came out from a Bitcoin miner.
Okay.
P2P.org is, I mean, Constantine is just a very early
Mm.
crypto guy. Actually, I knew him from he was participating in the Cosmos
Oh, no way! Wow.
fundraiser, and then he started P2P. Also later started Lido,
Oh, wow.
and
There you go.
a whole bunch of other stuff. He's
Very cool.
a
I
great
was thinking like
entrepreneur.
Figment and Block Daemon. Like those guys are.
Figment and
You know,
Block Demon raised a lot of money. Yeah,
is it Block
absolutely.
Demon or Block Daemon?
I'm not totally sure.
I hear everyone saying block demon, I don't know. For me, it's like block daemon, but I have no idea either. Who knows?
I'm actually not totally sure.
Block
Yeah,
demon would
and
probably
we've
make more
hired a few
sense.
people from them, so I
Yeah,
should know.
yeah,
But
yeah. All right. So where do you see is the future of a blockchain just proof of stake, like or like proof of stake like because proof of work doesn't isn't really it's not really viable anymore. You can't get something up and running that's super secure with proof of work. So it's kind of like by default you got to go proof of stake.
yeah, but I think CK proving is actually also something that that is gonna, in some cases, I think maybe reduce the need for proof of stake. Because in the end, what does proof of stake do? It basically gives you some guarantee that something was done correctly,
Mm.
and then it gives you an ordering. Say, okay, this is the order of all these transactions and blocks in the state. I think some of this can be done using CK proofs. Now, CK proofs do not replace the need for having some blockchains with consensus and stuff. But for example, I mean, let's say you could do CK apps on top of proof of stake blockchains, and then you can put a lot in there instead of having like some other chain. So I do think that in the long run, ZK proofs are going to have a big impact. It's an area we've also spent, we spend a fair bit of time, kind of a research bandwidth thinking about this. And, should we go into operating ZK proving infrastructure and what does it look like? It's still very early, but I think that's probably the technology that is most likely to change the kind of nature of how blockchains work and also the role that proof of stake plays.
Do you think that the future is going to be millions of blockchains, or do you think there's going to be like 10 that everyone uses, or how do you see that forming?
Yeah, I'm definitely more on the side of like a lot of blockchains, probably millions.
I guess why?
Well, I mean, for one, is just the easiest way to scale, right? If you're going to have now the whole world do, I mean, let's say Solana now has, what is it, 10,000 transactions a second or something like that.
If the whole world using one blockchain, it's going to get clogged up. Essentially, the
I mean, I think Solana already, right, is, I mean, like you have these blockchains who already kind of are now, of course, they're going to scale it more and stuff like that. But I think the idea you can have like one blockchain to like handle this doesn't work. You also have other reasons, right? So, for example, maybe you want to have free transactions for your users, or you want to capture more of the value. And in the end, right, a lot of, if you build a smart contract app on Ethereum or Solana, a lot of value ends up kind of flowing to the base layer, right? It's so via MEV, it flows to the token holders and the stakers. But you probably want to minimize that, and you want to capture more of that value if you develop a blockchain application. So then I think if you build like specific blockchain application specific blockchain or some kind of roll up, I think roll ups are also going to play a big role, especially sort of application specific roll ups. So I do think we're going to see like lots and lots and lots of different chains. They may not all have their own like consensus, but I think the one monolithic chain thing is. I think the Solana strategy is still great. I think it's great to have a chain that has a very high throughput, and like one way I, for example, can imagine the Solana future to play out is that people say I'm going to start off on Solana. Let me just create my smart contract on there, and the good thing is Solana can have enough throughput and enough capacity that you can start there and you can get some traction. But once it really has usage, let's say if you build like a game or a DePIN network or something like that, that's like transaction intensive. I think many of these are going to migrate to some kind of actually be invested in a company with Course One Ventures called SoulForge, and they're doing like SVM rollups. So basically, Solana rollups on Solana, where they're basically like, hey, you're a Solana application, you now have a lot of usage, but you can you can basically improve the throughput, improve the reliability, and maybe capture more value if you now create some kind of SVM rollup. So I can see. I think I'm pretty bullish on like something like that playing out in the future. Now, of course, you do have some. I'm sure people will continue to push a lot the envelope of scalability And I guess probably on the most extreme end, you have something like Mega Eve, which is I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically an Ethereum roll up where they want to have like one supercomputer run the roll up. Now it's centralized because there's like one machine. So decentralization and censorship resistance and stuff, TBD.
It is kind of funny that, like, as we go to more scalable solutions, it's just like a database. I'm like, like we're back where we started, not always, but it's kind of like where it trends to.
Yeah, there's some
Uh,
of that. Yeah.
all right. So 10 years out, where's Course One? What's the long-term vision there?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, 10 years out, I hope we really get to the point where a significant amount of, the world's economic activity happens on chain, where, financial assets get issued on chain, and where you have, what we see today on Solana, but, like 1,000x, right? So we see it on like lots of different chains and like real adoption and real usage. And then I imagine that we can be one of the main companies that operate all these infrastructures for potentially, I don't know, 1,000 different networks processing like huge amounts of transactions every day, helping to do that efficiently. And then I think there can be a lot of value in doing this intelligently. So I think data, AI, different optimizations, I think will become more important. And so this is also areas where we invest in, and we try to build up these kind of capabilities to understand these systems better, visualize better what's happening, and be able to optimize in different ways. And I think that way you can create a lot of value. So yeah, I think that's basically where I see Course One.
That's awesome. All right. I want to change subject slightly. Well, actually, kind of a lot. Urbit. I have been confused by Urbit for generations. What is it? And explain it to me, because it's for gigabrains only, and I'm unfortunately a small brain. So tell me.
Yeah, so for Urbit,
And sorry for context. I think you're on the board of Urbit or something. Like, you're involved in
I'm
some
on the
capacity.
board of the foundation. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So Urbit, the way, let me say first of all what drew me to Urbit. So I think if you, in the end, crypto is about the ideas of sovereignty and ownership, right? Where like you are fully in charge of your own, your own assets. You can make whatever transactions you want. You control it. But if you look at, I think the way it works right now, I have some degree of unease about it because it feels like I kind of own the stuff, but I kind of don't. And the reason why I kind of don't is because I use these computers, like cell phone, desktop computer, websites that are kind of really controlled by somebody else. And so you're using kind of this underlying tech infrastructure that you don't really own or you don't really control. So I think Urbit had very much this vision of we want to have a sort of computer and operating system that an individual can fully own and control. And so it's, in a way, it's a much deeper attempt than crypto, right? Where crypto is more on the kind of application level. You say like, okay, when we're going to issue these assets and you hold these keys and you control it if you control the keys. And Urbit is like, well, let's allow you to own sort of the full stack, including the software that will then control these keys and sign the transactions. So that's kind of what drew me to it. I mean, in terms of the history of Urbit is pretty interesting. Basically, the genesis story is there's this guy Curtis Yarman who made some money from some startup, and he was living in the Bay Area, and then he didn't have to work anymore for a while, and then he did two things. One is he started a blog under a pseudonym called Mencius Moldbug, and that blog became very famous and very influential among the sort of conservative. So he is one who like influenced a lot of people like Peter Thiel and JD Vance and a lot of these more right politicians are influenced by his writing. So he became very famous and infamous for that blog. But then the other thing he was working on was Urbit, and with Urbit, the initial, so sort of the impetus for this was he had been building software, web applications, He just felt it was kind of a mess and aesthetically ugly, and that it was basically very complex. Where you had on the underlying, you have something like Unix, which is from the 60s or 70s, and then you have all of these layers on top. And it was just, this is really complicated and kind of ugly, and I don't really like it. So, but if we know today how people uh, want to use computers and want to use technology, how would you design a computing system then from scratch? So he spent 10 years like by himself, sort of on this journey to like define the architecture of the system, to design the programming language. And it all looks very alien because he really tried to do it from first principles, says we're going to ignore how everyone else is doing it, but I'm going to try to think from first principle, what should this look like? So you ended up with a system that looks very bizarre, and then people see it and they're like, what is this thing? It looks like nothing I've seen. It looks like so strange. But that was the genesis, and then he raised some money from Peter Thiel in 2013 for a company that then worked on, really building this and bringing this to maturity, and maybe a little bit more on sort of how Urbit works. So Urbit is centers around the idea of a personal server. So it's basically the idea that, today, if you use applications, right, you use Twitter and you use Google and you use Netflix and you use all these different apps, and they're basically all cloud services that are controlled by each company. And in the Urbit world, the idea is you have your own cloud server, and all of your data would be in your cloud server. And if you want to use some application, you would download this application to your server and it runs on that server. So, and then all of these servers, they are connected with each other and they can speak with each other. And so that's kind of the Urbit vision. And I learned about it doing a podcast with one of the founders in 2017, and was kind of following it for a while, and then got more involved in maybe 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And yeah, I'm on the board today of the foundation, and yeah, pretty fairly involved in the ecosystem as well.
That's amazing. So is it software only, or is there also a hardware component where they're like creating a device?
It's software only. There are ideas for hardware, but they're not realized today. It's
Totally.
software only.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, no, thank you. You explained that exceptionally well. I understood it. I'm always trying to like understand Urbit, and like this is the first time I'm like, okay, cool. I get it.
Okay, I'm
All
happy to
right.
hear that.
I want to go the opposite of Urbit, meme coins. Tell me your thoughts around meme coins.
I mean, I think on some level, of course, it's nothing new, right? I mean, we've had meme coin. I mean, even Bitcoin, right? What is Bitcoin? I mean, you could say one way to think about Bitcoin is there's this meme of kind of a digital gold, and then Bitcoin is the digital gold meme coin. And in the end, the value is driven by people believing in this meme, and valuing that. And it's different maybe from some other things, right? Where some other things are trying to do crypto applications that then produce some kind of revenue stream, and you can almost value it like shares in a company, right? Where you use some sort of discounted cash flow thing, and this is how much the thing is worth, right? And I think the other thing is, well, like there's nothing really underpinning it. There's no revenue stream underpinning the value of a Bitcoin. It's really just the value other people have in it, and then that's kind of a meme, right? And I think if you look at the coin market cap, I mean, I would say a lot of the coins, even top coins, I mean, take something like XRP, right? I mean, what has XRP
You're gonna
really?
have a whole bot army now that's gonna attack you.
Yeah, but I would say what has XRP? How many startups have I met that like build on XRP? It's basically been like zero forever, and it's really some kind of meme coin as well. And I think the same thing can be said for Cardano maybe, or there's a whole bunch of a whole bunch of them. And now often there is something behind, right, where they say, where they do work and they do build something, and they say then something is going to come. But I think the reason why people buy these things is still because there's some kind of some sort of meme degree that they buy in. Now I guess the interesting thing now has been more with meme. But then, of course, in some cases, right, people are like, we don't even have that pretense, right, that there's anything behind, right? It's literally just a meme. It's
Like
literally just,
Dogecoin or something.
yeah, like Dogecoin, exactly. I think Dogecoin is, of course, really the
Dogecoin is
first
like
one.
top 10, or I don't know where it sits, but it's like it's very,
Seven, yeah, right
it's a
now.
7. That's insane, right?
Yeah,
So there's this funny saying. It's like, what's the difference between a cult and a religion? It's like the length of time. It's like if your
yeah,
cult lasts a long time, it turns into a religion. And I think about Bitcoin for sure, but then also Dogecoin. Like Dogecoin is explicitly, Dogecoin is not trying to be anything. Bitcoin is like trying to be, this decentralized value, et cetera, non-sovereign value. Dogecoin is just like funny dog, it's crazy.
yeah. I mean, it is crazy, and then it's crazy. Even now, you have like, okay, you have a 13 Shiba Inu, which is
Yeah.
literally. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets.
Like another dog, a different dog,
It's another dog. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if you look at the top 100, then there's dog with hat, right? So there's three dog
which is a
coins.
dog with
There's
a hat. There you go.
Bonk. There's
Yeah.
another one with a dog logo. There's Flocky, which is another dog logo. I mean, the amount of dog coins in the first 100 is pretty bananas. I think now though it's it's I guess devolved a little bit into some kind of more like casino gambling like thing, right? Where it's really just people, try to hype something quickly, and then they try to get in there before the others do, and then sell before. So these, I think, are mostly going to be, very short lived, right? They won't have the kind of staying power.
Do you think the meme coin trend is going to go away, or you think just that some of the coins are actually going to go away?
I don't think the meme coin trend. I mean, again, right? So, or like, what was the back then when we got into crypto? What was the number two? It was Litecoin, right? And what was
Yeah,
Litecoin's?
it
Litecoin's
was silver.
silver to
Yeah,
Bitcoin's gold, right?
right.
Because it was like, oh,
Yeah,
if Bitcoin's going to be gold, then
yeah,
Litecoin's
yeah,
going to be
yeah.
silver. It's
Oh my
completely
gosh.
nonsensical, right? It's really
Yeah,
like a nonsensical meme. So I think it's abundantly clear to me that like memes are here to stay. I think there's also some degree to which I imagine with more and more tech and more AI that people will feel increasingly, I have a hard time, contributing to the economy in a productive way and earn money that way. And I think there's a sort of feeling of futility and nihilism that I think that will result in people. And I think that's very bullish for meme coins, because then you're like, if you have that, then you really just, why not just speculate, and like why not just take random gambles, and like maybe you strike it big. I mean, it's of course interesting, like some of the places where you have the most crypto trading and most meme coin tradings are places like South Korea. And from my understanding of like why is that the case, it's also one reason that it's a very rigid economy. You don't have a lot of startups or opportunities, but there's a bunch of big companies, and you can try to get into this company, and the salaries are not very high, but the cost of living is pretty high. And if you want to have, I don't know, get married or girlfriend or family, you expect it to have a house or an apartment, own a place, but that's kind of financially not really achievable for most people. So then they're like, okay, let's just play the lottery. Let's just gamble with these coins. And I think that's just gonna increase. And I think that can totally get like insane proportions. I mean, in a way, it already has, right, with Dogecoin.
that and Pump.Fun is like one of the most successful startups of history. It's like I think it's been live for less than a year, I think, and it's earned like I don't know, $170 million or something like that. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
absolutely bonkers. But yeah, what's so interesting is like I wonder what if globally we just made a whole bunch more houses and suddenly people could now afford homes. What would that do to this like speculative mentality? Would it decrease it because everyone's like, oh, now I can easily afford a home. I don't have to work 50 years in order to afford a home. I can work for 10 years and afford a home, or like easily get some sort of mortgage. I wonder if that would like have an impact on the speculative economy. Maybe not,
I,
but who
I
knows?
think it probably would a little bit at least,
Yeah,
but who knows? It's not an experiment you can run easily.
yeah, yeah. All right, Brian, thank you. This has been absolutely incredible. It's time for the closing questions. You're gonna hate this first one. Are you ready?
Ready.
What is the price of Bitcoin 1 year from now?
All right. Uh, I will say 140K.
140K. So December 6th, 2025. Brian Nostradamus Crain.
I'll put a reminder for myself, and then we can check in on that in a year.
Okay, 140. I like it. That's good. All right. What is a book, movie, podcast, TV show, whatever, one piece of content that had a very big impact on you?
So one book.
One book, movie, podcast, TV show, except like one piece of content that had a major impact on you.
Yeah, okay. So one book that had a big impact on me was this book called The 4 Hour Work Week. And The 4 Hour Work Week was written by this guy called Tim Ferriss a long time ago. And he basically said like, hey, you should like go try to start a little business and kind of automate everything so it makes enough money so you can live on, and then you kind of like free and you can just sort of go and enjoy your life and have a bunch of adventures. That was basically, and then he has like, here's how to do this. And so I read that and I was very inspired because I felt like that kind of freedom I really longed for. And I think that had a significant impact in interesting me in entrepreneurship and starting a company. And of course, in the end, I didn't really go down that route. I ended up building something that actually I do have to work on a lot more than 4 hours a week. But it definitely had an impact in sort of inspiring that passion for entrepreneurship.
That's super cool. It's funny. I feel like a lot of people that read that book, they got the lessons that you took, but then they end up being entrepreneurial and they end up working like way more than like the normal person. It's like 60, 70 hours a week or whatever. But anyways, all right. You could not work in Web3. What would you be doing?
Okay, so I will say might work on this. So I'm pretty interested in the idea of knowledge management. So basically, how you can have a system external to yourself where you can keep track of all your ideas and goals and projects, and sort of enhance the capacity of your mind and the ability to get stuff done. There is, if people are interested in this, for example, there's a book called Second Brain, which sort of is around that concept. And I've been very interested in a productivity system in the past called Getting Things Done, which also has this idea that your mind is not about keeping ideas, but it's about having ideas, and then you put it out into a system. But the system you have to rely on that then helps you to execute on it. And so I'm very interested in that. I've been using a software called Obsidian for a while that I'm a huge fan of, that is really powerful, sort of in this direction. And I think with AI, if you kind of combine that together with AI, it becomes like very, very interesting. And so I think that would be a very cool area to work on. So I could imagine something like that, or maybe something more around longevity, biotech, science, decentralized science, something in that direction. I'm also interested in.
It's very cool. All right. What is one lesson that you wish you knew before you started your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, just the importance of focus. So be very focused and just do the obvious thing and execute well, and don't get too distracted. Yeah, so
I love
that's
it. Love it.
yeah.
Awesome. Brian, thank you so much, man. This was absolutely incredible. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X. So it's at CrainBF. Or you can, if you want to check out Course One, you're interested in staking, you can go to course.one.
Amazing. Brian, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Really enjoyed the conversation. It was great questions. And yeah, it was so fun to be on.
Thanks. Talk soon.